Make It Yourselfers. Today I'm going to share with you how to make a fun centerpiece for Halloween. This is a healthier recipe to try to avoid all of the candy, but it's something that is fun for kids and adults alike. I used to make these fun cheese balls when my son used to go to a friend's nursery school, and for a while I was helping them out at the beginning of the year when they needed a little bit extra help. I would go in for a few hours and just give them a hand. When they celebrated Halloween, I loved to be part of it, and one of the things that I would make was this spooky face that was basically just ham covered. At the time, I just filled it with a mask, or I would make the face shape out of wadded up paper and then I would cover it up with plastic. But then that didn't make a lot of sense. You were wasting a lot of extra materials and it just lacked something. And in this case, I'm going to be sharing with you how you can make it into a cheese ball. You can make a cheese ball either in the shape of a face or a hand, and then you get this creepy look by adding skin to it. This year I used salami to try something new, but in the past I've always used a serrano ham, which is like a prosciutto for Italy. Here in Spain it's serrano ham, and they will give you a little bit different look. You can see that the serrano ham is a bit darker and it has more of the marbling of the fat and bigger pieces, whereas the salami is a little bit lighter in color and the fat is more marbled into it in smaller pieces. And you could also do a combination of the two. But what I like to do now is make the form out of cheese. I make a cheese ball type recipe and then I cover it in the ham, and that is just delicious. In the past, I used to make a cheese ball recipe that we loved, but it used an imitation crab meat or surimi. The problem with that recipe is I now like to stay away from any of those processed type foods. Surimi has things like cornstarch and sugar in it, apart from artificial colors and flavors. So to sort of mimic that seafood taste, I decided to try something new this year. Here in Spain, it's quite easy to find salted cod, and you can find it either in big pieces of cod, or in this case, it is called migas de bacalao, which are basically crumbs. And you can see that these are just tiny pieces of salted cod, and you can even eat this as is. It's quite salty though. What I did is I decided to pre-soak the cod and then use it in my cheese ball. I wasn't sure what the final outcome would be. I couldn't find anybody else who had done it, but it was actually quite good, and my husband loved it. He liked it so much more than the original cheese ball, and in fact, I brought out the face that I made for taking pictures, and basically he ate it with his meal. He pretty much finished it off, except for the little bit that I had tried and the little bit that I ate with him at lunchtime. This recipe though is very simple. It's very clean. It uses cream cheese. You'll want to find a cleaner cream cheese if you can. This cream cheese only has cream, milk, and lactic ferments, or it's basically a dairy starter, and salt. We don't even need to add any salt to this because the salted cod has a lot of salt on its own. The only tricky part of this recipe is how to regulate that salt. And that will depend on how much you soak the cod before you add it to the rest of the ingredients. In the blog, I showed how to add a bit of dried onion and a bit of garlic powder to my finished cheese ball. But if you're sensitive to those ingredients and you want a fully carnivore cheese ball, there is no reason that you need to add those. But it did give it some flavor, it gave it some personality, so definitely try it out if you don't have any issues with spices and other seasonings. But again, you don't need any salt. You could maybe add some black pepper if you want. I didn't try that, but I'm sure that would add just a little bit of kick too. I didn't pre-soak this cod as much as I would for most recipes because I did want a bit of saltiness. I wanted it to add some flavor to the finished cheese ball. So what I did is I pre-soaked my cod for about an hour, and I changed out the water about every 15 minutes because obviously the salt will go from the cod into the water, and if you keep switching it out, you get rid of some of that salt and then you have it soaking in fresh water again. You can do this for as long or as short a time as you like. What I actually do is I will try some of the cod as I go along, and if I find that it's really, really salty still, I will soak it just a little bit longer. Consider the fact that the cheese itself does have some salt, although it's pretty light in salt flavor, but just try to soak it enough so that your overall cheese ball is not too salty. That's pretty much all you're gonna need. This recipe is really simple. If you are going to be making the face, you might want something to use as eyeballs. I have used a variety of things. I have used olives in the past. And this year I found these little cream cheese balls that had raspberry on the inside. And I cut those open and that looked like a pupil. The same thing goes with the olive, especially if you use some sort of stuffed olive. Then it also looks like it has the pupil and it makes it a little bit more realistic. In the past, I also used a recipe that I used to make for my son, and they were basically gummy eyeballs for Halloween made with coconut milk and gelatin, and then on the inside it had blueberries for the pupil and a little bit of raspberry puree to go around the pupils. For those who don't have issues with fruit and just a little bit of honey, you can also make something fun like that. For the hand, I also experimented with adding some fingernails. You could add something like an almond. I made some cheese shapes using some candy molds, and I had witch finger molds. So I molded the cheese and then cut out the fingernails and added that to my finished cheese ball. And that worked really well too. They were a little bit long for the size of my hand, but it still added a fun touch to it, so that's something you could consider doing as well. But other than that, there's really not too much more to this, so it's a simple recipe. Let's get started. To begin, we'll be soaking the cod. I like to break it up into smaller pieces because that helps it desalt a bit quicker. I add the water, and then I will be changing out the water every 15 minutes or so. And I will taste it in between just to see how it turns out so that it's not too salty. You can see each time I change the water, I like to break it up into little pieces again. That helps make it a more manageable size for the cheese ball itself, but it also helps it desalt a bit quicker. Once the salt content seems about right, I will be straining out the hydrated cod, and I try to press out as much liquid as possible. I'm trying to keep from incorporating extra water into the cheese ball so that it will keep longer. Once the cod is ready, I'm going to start mixing up the cheese ball. Here I have the cream cheese. I'm going to add some dried onion and some garlic powder. Again, if you can't handle seasonings, you don't have to add them. I'm going to mix it up as well as possible to incorporate the seasonings throughout the mixture. And then I will be adding my cod, and I will also be mixing that in. If your cod is in larger pieces, you're going to want to do this in a food processor so that it will break up into smaller pieces. I was a bit lazy and I didn't want to have to clean out my food processor, so I tried with an electric beater. It worked pretty well, but it didn't break up the pieces of cod as much, and it was a bit messier. I did end up spraying some of the cream cheese over my counter, but it is something that you can try in a pinch. At the last minute, I decided to incorporate some powdered cheese. This is like a grated Parmesan. It was just out of curiosity. It was actually good both ways, but it's just to give you another idea of something you can try. That's all there is to it, to making the cheese ball. So then I was trying to decide what I wanted to do shape-wise. I kind of looked at my hand as a guidance for size, and I also looked at a piece of cheese that I thought looked like a skull to give me an idea for the skull itself. You can see I am just basically winging this. I made sort of a circle shape for the palm, and then I kind of added 4 fingers and a thumb and just kept adding to it to make it look more lifelike. You can refine the shape as you put the meat over top of it, and you can kind of press it and separate the pieces out more. So don't worry about it too much. Just keep adding the meat until you fully cover the cheese ball, and you can play with it and just shape it a little bit more. It's actually easier to shape when you have the meat over top of it. Once you're happy with the shape, you're going to want to stick it in the fridge. That will help set it up, but will also help the flavors meld together. Now I'm going to show you how you can make the skull shaped too. This one, I made a smaller one because I was just using the leftover cheese, but you can make this as large as you like. I just made an oval shape that's a bit wider on the top, and then I used a spoon to sort of press out the eye cavities. I made a little bit of a space for the nose and just tried to give it a little bit of a mouth shape. And then just like with the hand, I was covering it with the meats. This was actually easier with the salami than with the ham. For a smaller shape, you might want to choose a salami, or in this case, it was salchichon. Again, I used cream cheese this year. They were cream cheese balls that I found with raspberry filling, and I added those for the eyes. Once it's chilled, it's generally pretty easy to flip it over onto a plate. You can see this is where I was adding the fingernails to mine. I like to make these on parchment paper. That makes it a lot easier to take it off and to place it on your finished board. Here I'm using it to make some Halloween charcuterie boards. I have surrounded it with some molded cheese shapes and other pieces of cheese that I cut out with cookie cutters. And I also have a tutorial on the blog for both of those, and I also have a video up on YouTube. You can also surround it with other cured meats. I added some fouet, some salchichon, some chorizo, and if you use a variety of colors, that just adds to the fun and playfulness of it. You can see that the larger pieces of meat I kind of cut into strips and rolled up just so that they would fit better on the platter and not overwhelm it. That's all there is to it. Feel free to dig in. You can spread it on crackers or whatever you have. Actually, at home, we generally use something like a pork rind, but for the video, we had some crackers left over from a visit with friends, so I thought I would show it on crackers, which is a little more typical. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Until next time.